What's up, everybody? Today I am reviewing Dor Vahdor, Lost Legends and Sagas of Preflood Earth, Volume 1, Creation, Angels, War. Let's get into it. Who should buy this book and read it, and who will enjoy it? So full context, Dor Vahdor is a sponsor of the Story Geeks podcast and the Art of Storytelling YouTube channel. As a part of our sponsorship deal, I was asked to do a review of this book, which I am happy to do. Before I get into the details of the book itself, I do want to point out basically who is this book for. This book is written for people who like fantasy novels, especially high fantasy novels, most especially fantasy novels that involve a lot of myths. In this case, there's a lot of creation myths that are being played with here, and if you are a fan of any of those things, then I think that you will actually really enjoy this particular book. Dor Vahdor was actually written by Lazarus Master Fox and was produced or published by Novus Renaissance. The good news is about any small press publisher, that gives them the flexibility to do whatever they want. So you'll notice that there's quite a bit of artwork in this book, all across the board. I mean, every few pages there's a piece of art. Some of them are more of a sketch type of a concept, and then some of them are more completed art that is full color. Likewise, the chapters are a little bit different than you might find in a normal trade paperback, let's say. In this book, the chapters actually tend to be a little bit shorter, which I'm a big fan of, and the chapters are organized and structured in such a way that it reads almost more like a screenplay in parts than it does like a full novel. I don't know how many words Dor Vahdor actually is, but I'm assuming it's around 25,000 words or so. So it's a little bit shorter. Again, this is a small press publisher, so they're able to do things a little differently than a big publisher would do. And actually, I think that's good, because I think a lot of big publishers actually tend to put too many words into their books. Recently, I actually picked up a copy of Michael Crichton's book, Pirate Latitudes, and I found that I really enjoyed it because it was not your normal novel. It actually felt like you were reading more of a screenplay treatment. It was not necessarily super literary, and if you like the books that I've written, those do not tend to be very literary in nature either. So I talk about people who like high fantasy. This book surrounds a lot of creation myths. Now, creation myths are different across different faith backgrounds, different religions in the past, but there are some similarities to some of the creation narratives that exist out there as well. This plays with those. So this goes outside of what you might find in something like, I'll say, the Bible or the Quran or something like that. This goes outside of those stories and begins to build myths and other stories around what's going on. In this first volume, which there will be more volumes over time, we get to see how the world was created, most especially how the angels were created, and then also we get to see the great war in heaven prior to the creation of mankind. I will get into a few thoughts that will get into spoiler territory, but before I do that, I'll give you some thoughts about whether or not you should buy this. If you're in the right audience group to purchase this book, I will give you that information before I get into the spoilers, so you can stop the video if you don't want spoilers. The ideal people that are suited for this book, first of all, when I talk about creation myths, you're either into that or you're not into that. If you are into that, this has some thought-provoking aspects to it. I said on one of the podcasts recently that I literally had a question about pondering in the Bible what was Lucifer's motivation for doing what he does in the Bible. And this actually literally covers those topics. It goes into detail about why Lucifer would have rebelled against God in the first place. Again, we didn't necessarily get that information in the Bible, let's say, but Lazarus Master Fox is playing with that theme as he writes this book. I do think it could classify as a young adult book, although I don't think it needs to. It's in the realm of what I would say looks like a Narnia book or a C.S. Lewis high fantasy sort of book. It does deal with sprawling, intense battles between angels that are rebelling against God versus angels that are trying to defend what God has already created. The author and the artist do a good job of building a mythos that is expansive and you'll notice things that like billions of years will pass as you read this book, and there are trillions upon trillions of angels in these armies. So that speaks to this bigger world, this world building that's being done here that I think is really valuable. There's also, just like you might find in a Tolkien book, there's glossary that includes descriptions of all the characters and the character types, the angel types in there. If you like world building, I think you'll really enjoy digging into a lot of that kind of thing. The illustrations, you're either going to like them or you're not going to like them. They vary in terms of my particular interest in them. Some of them are fantastic, and then other ones feel a little bit more rushed, maybe. And the book itself is like I said, it's in a non-conventional format. I tend to like paperback books, but I don't tend to like conventional. So this is somewhere in between, because this is like the size is very, very large. That's meant to be able to showcase a lot of the illustrations. It's a little bit large for the formatting that my preference is, but it does do its job in terms of showcasing what the illustrations are meant to accompany this story. One of the things that I would say about this book is that it moves fast. So if you start the book, it has some really good philosophical musings to start the book, theological musings to start the book, which I found really fascinating, because a lot of traditional publishers would never do that. They would never have some philosophies discussed before the story even starts. They would just take you straight into the story. Maybe you would get an introduction or something, but that's it. Here, there's a lot of philosophy, and you might even call it theology, that's discussed up front. You either will like that or you won't like that. I liked it. I thought it was cool. It helped me get into the bigger story. The story moves pretty fast. It's very expansive. And actually, when it gets into the war part of the book, I could have gone into much more detail on all of the different battles, because I found those interesting. They're well written. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of expansiveness to the armies that are fighting. And I think that that's pretty cool. I would have liked it to be twice as long, but go deeper into those battles, which would have been fantastic. And that might happen in some of the future volumes. So this is just volume 1. There could be future volumes where we get into those aspects of what's going on. So that's my really quick, non-spoilery review. I'm going to get into a few spoilers if you want to stick around and listen to what I have to say about that. But again, this could qualify as young adult, which means that a younger audience should be able to read this no problem. There's no cursing in it. There is some violence, but I think that violence is, again, sort of like Tolkien-esque or Narnia-esque, if you will. So the ideal audience for this is people who are into mythology, especially if they're into creation mythology, especially if they're into Christian mythology that goes beyond what you might find in some of the books that are considered spiritual books, like the Quran, the Bible, etc., etc. My thoughts. I thought this was good. I'm not necessarily a creation myth person. I like to think about it. I like to discuss it philosophically. As far as storytelling goes, it's not necessarily my genre, but I do like fantasy. This is a little bit more high fantasy than what I've read recently, and I don't read a lot of high fantasy anymore. I used to like high fantasy a lot more when I was younger, and I think that I would have really enjoyed this when I was younger. I think that would have worked really, really well. But I do think that a lot of younger readers will really enjoy this. I also think, look, I'm always a fan of small press publishers. I also, there's some choices in here that I wouldn't have made. Like, notice here, you've got, well, this is actually one of the pretty cool illustrations, but you have like a border around the pages. Like, I wouldn't necessarily have chosen that. Is it super distracting? Does it get in the way? Not really, but I would not have necessarily chosen that. Like I said, I like kind of the smaller paperback format as opposed to the larger format. But again, if you want to get into the illustrations like we do here, then you need kind of that more expansive kind of deal. If you like creation mythology, go check it out. And it's really helpful to us because this is a sponsor of ours. So by you supporting them, it supports us, which is fantastic. In regards to spoilers, my initial question about what was going on with Lucifer's decision making is covered extensively here. So it's sort of weird for me to think about that question, and then like 2 months later there's a book specifically that I'm reading about that topic. That's just very coincidental, but very interesting. I think that basically the showcasing of Lucifer's hubris in his attempt to be like God, not unlike Adam and Eve eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is a pretty fascinating concept. And I like the fact that someone has created a story around that is extra biblical in this case, which I think was really good. The mythology around the angels and making sure that the angels are all in their different types and in their different places and have different roles to play is really well done. And there's an extensive battle that occurs between Lucifer and the angels that side with Lucifer, and then all the other angels who are still siding with God. Now, I should say I'm using the term God. That's not necessarily used in this book. There is a specific name for God, and that is a little bit different. So just know that I'm using terms that may not appear in the book. The battle itself is expansive and extensive, which is cool because that's one of my favorite parts of the actual book. There are some despite the fact that it's very esoteric and then there's a lot of angels and like mythology that's wrapped up in here, I do think that we get personal with some of the angels and some of the fights that are being had. We get to know the angels a little bit better. Like I said, I think we could have seen a lot more from some of the battles. I would have loved to have 2-3 times as much content around the battles as we get in this particular book. But again, it's volume 1, and I think most fantasy writers will overwrite and write too much. I'm really happy that Lazarus Master Fox did not do that here. He did not go that extensive and create a book of 90,000 words, which would have been way too much, and would have made me actually less interested in it because I wouldn't have been as big of a fan because I don't really like super long novels. The end of Dor Vahdor does get into the creation narrative of man, but just barely, and so this book ends up being a good setting the tone for what's to come. And so I can only imagine that we're going to move on to another volume where we're going to see more, in this case, probably Christian mythology weaved into this larger mythology about the creation narrative. So that's really interesting and intriguing. And I think that a lot of people who like this book will probably go on to purchase all of the other books in the series because it's going to stay in this frame of reference, which I think a lot of people will really enjoy. So there you go. That's my review of Dor Vahdor, Lost Legends and Sagas of Preflood Earth, Volume 1, Creation, Angels, War. Again, if you like creation myths and you like creation narratives that are playing with the high fantasy genre, if you're a big fan of the Narnia books, and if you like young adult fiction, then this is a good book for you to go and pick up. Check it out, pick up a copy, help support our channel. We appreciate you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.